Over 5 years, a very disturbing story has emerged about warnings. A well-respected international journalist, David Yallop, had interviewed Abu Nidal, who had warned him that there was going to be an attack on an American airliner. Yallop flew immediately back to London and notified the British authorities, MI6.
Abu Nidal, mastermind of the Rome and Vienna airport massacres, now trying to stop more killing.
I was in Libya to interview Gaddafi and Abu Nidal and a group of other people. I'd had a conversation with a man called Brian Crozier, who was an asset for the CIA and MI6, and I'd been asked by him to ask 3 or 4 specific questions to Nidal. Nidal had told me that he was being put under great pressure by the Syrians to reactivate against an American target. I typed up an 8-page report, which I have a copy of here, in which I talk about the pressure being put on Nidal by both Syria and Iraq at that time to resume terror tactics. And I then elaborated beyond the report, specifically with regard to the pressure from Syria and to a potential American target. I was insistent that this information, this was, by the way, given not just to Crozier, but to a senior member of MI6 by myself, that this should be shared with the CIA and should be shared with them immediately.
After that, there was a warning to the American embassy in Helsinki. Frighteningly specific. A woman would carry a bomb on board an American airliner at Frankfurt, heading for New York. That was circulated again through Interpol and again through the American State Department warning system.
In the build-up prior to the tragedy, there were a number of warnings that came out through the FAA and various other agencies. The particular one that was of interest to me was the Helsinki warning, which I first had knowledge of. I believe it was on the morning of the 8th of December.
We did indeed receive on December 9th an advisory based on an untested source in terms of reliability. That information was disseminated throughout this embassy, and we advised all appropriate British authorities, including all American carriers.
I'd received a telex. I was in Brussels, actually, on the morning, and I'd received a telex from headquarters that I was to go to Helsinki and that I was to get further information from my colleague in Frankfurt, who I telephoned and then subsequently came back to London and made arrangements to travel to Helsinki later that day.
It was an unidentified caller that apparently made a phone call to our embassy in Helsinki.
I got the impression from the person I was discussing it with that it had been thoroughly checked out and was considered to be a hoax.
We receive dozens of threats each day. We always take them seriously. In this case, we took action immediately.
We were notified of it. It was circulated to all the appropriate commands. To anticipate your next question, no, as far as I can determine at this point, it was not posted on bulletin boards.
Almost at the same time as I was talking to these 2 secret agents here in London, that a warning had come from Helsinki that talked of the bombing of a Frankfurt-bound plane, and that other warnings were even more specific and talked of Pan Am 103. And what bemused me was that all of us had, in our own way, given pieces of a very crucial puzzle to intelligence, which they'd chosen to ignore, or so it seemed. But subsequently, it became apparent to me from further inquiries that they hadn't ignored them, and that a number of VIPs were pulled off that plane, a number of intelligence operatives were pulled off that plane.
The South Africans, particularly Pick Botha, were booked on Flight 103 and changed pretty much at the last hour or so. These South Africans had been warned by Bureau of State Security to change reservations.
The South Africans booked on Flight 103 cancelled just before departure. Along with Pick Botha, General Mallon, the Defense Minister, and General Van Tonder, head of the Secret Service, BOSS. and other senior government officials. Botha, Mallon and Van Tonder confirmed this change in travel arrangements to British businessman Tiny Rowlands. They tell him the source of the information was of the kind that could not be dismissed. Botha rebooks on the earlier Pan Am 101. General Van Tonder and 2 other members of BOSS cancel their trip altogether.
BOSS has close ties to two very important services, to the Israeli service and also to the American, to the Central Intelligence Agency.
Sometimes by going public, you achieve, you give undue attention to what the terrorist wants to call attention to. But if you want me to say that if we have specific information that a specific flight was going to be specifically targeted and that information had any credibility to it, then I think widespread notices should be given and people should well know that they were putting their lives at risk.
If you count them out, there had been at least 8 warnings to the Western intelligence authorities, whether they were British, American or German. What did they need? A signed confession and a postcard?
I remember that Flora had been told that she'd be unlikely to get a seat on that flight because it was so near Christmas the plane would be full. Now the plane was nothing like full, and Flora bought her ticket just a couple of days before she flew. Now, if that came about because the others who would have filled the plane had been warned, what does that say about the system? It says that the warning was widely known, that a lot of people had heard it, a lot of people acted on it, and it's only the mugs who weren't on the inside of this system that's supposed to protect innocent people who actually climbed on board that plane.
She got on that plane really as a lamb to the slaughter, that she walked up into that aircraft believing, as anyone should, might, that she was going to be safely transported to America.
Neuss muss leben. Others might die, but Neuss must live. There were more than warnings. In Neuss near Frankfurt, before the destruction of Pan Am 103, a bomb-making terrorist cell associated with the Syrian-backed terrorist Ahmed Jibril had been discovered. The good burghers cross over the canal. The motor barge putters through oil splotches past the gantry cranes. Here, only the water is bad. The phone booth, still there at the end of the street. Is there somebody in it? Has someone been warned? Has someone been told to run away? 1 terrorist cell, 2 terrorist cells, 3 terrorist cells. How long before? How long after?
On the 8th of December 1988, the anniversary of the Intifada, units of the Sayeret Golani, the Golani Brigade, the SAS of the Israeli Defense Forces, raided a PFL-PGC base in southern Lebanon at a place called Al-Numia. It was an extensive base, miles of underground tunnels, underground bunkers, one of which was Ahmed Jibril's headquarters in southern Lebanon.
The group you referred to was a clandestine cell of the PFL-PGC, the Ahmed Jibril group, that had been sent to Germany to set up an operation, several operations as a matter of fact, directed against both the Americans and other Western targets. That group had been set up in the aftermath of the American shoot-down of the Iranian Airbus in July 1988.
Bodies float in the Persian Gulf. Iranians on a flight to Mecca, shot out of their Airbus by an American warship.
C'était un crime. Vu du côté iranien, du peuple surtout, c'était un crime. Et d'ailleurs, en réalité aussi, c'était un crime. Chasser un avion par fusée et tuer presque 300 personnes, c'est un crime. Et c'est jamais oublié par le peuple iranien. Parce que, bon, s'il s'agissait d'un autre pays. Alors, il y aurait de poursuites, il y aurait beaucoup de bruit dans le monde, mais concernant cet avion, ils l'ont chassé, après ils se sont félicités, et même ils ont décoré l'officier de Vincennes, bâtiment qui a tiré sur cet avion-là.
After the downing of the Iranian aircraft by the Vincent, everybody expected a revenge. The Iranian had to religiously avenge what had happened. It was clear that they will teach the Americans a lesson that they can do and duplicate what the Americans have done to them. It was only a question of time where an American airline, a courier, it doesn't have to be Pan Am, but specifically Pan Am, would be downed in retaliation.
Revenge just creates additional problems, doesn't it? I mean, after all, this incident wouldn't have happened if Iran wasn't and hadn't been in the process now for a long time of attacking U.S. and other shipping in the Gulf.
We've put all the ingredients into perspective, and we realize that it has to be a terrorist network that has experience in that matter. Iran would never do it directly. They would pay $10 million to a terrorist network that knew how to go about it, and the contract was out. It was known at the time that there is a contract for $10 million to down an American airline.
The Germans received a very specific warning that Ahmed Jibril's right-hand man, Hafiz Hussein Al-Kamoni, and a known bomb maker, Marwan Kresat, were heading for Germany.
Following these contacts between Jibril and the Iranians, a clandestine PFLP-GC cell was set up in Neuss, Germany, and their master bomb maker, one who had developed a lot of improvised explosive devices for Jibril in the past, was also sent to Germany to work on assembling such devices. One of the targets investigators determined in the aftermath of that group's arrest was going to be an American aircraft.
The BKA, the German criminal police, mounted a surveillance operation in Frankfurt, and in October 1988, Operation Autumn Leaves arrested 17 people. They found massive amounts of weaponry, explosives, timing devices, and most significantly, in the car that was being driven by Al-Kamoni, in which Kresat was a passenger, a Toshiba bomb beat radio cassette recorder with a primed bomb inside it, designed to blow up aircraft.
Il y a beaucoup, tout le temps, il est à Téhéran, il va et vient. Alors, vous savez qu'il était aussi, il est aussi un membre du service secret syrien. Il est un officier de ce service secret syrien. C'est l'Iran qui a exigé la réalisation de cet attentat et c'est Ahmad Jibril qui l'a réalisé. Ayant toute collaboration, toutes les possibilités mises à sa disposition par les ambassades concernées.
Marwan Kresat and Hafiz Al-Kameni on October 26, 1988, after a shopping spree buying electronic components. The buying binge filmed by German secret police are in this phone booth on Hafenstrasse, where they are arrested. Earlier, the BKA had been listening to the international line as Kresat from another phone had told Damascus, "I have made some changes in the medicine. It is better and stronger." When taken to BKA headquarters, Kresat insists he be allowed to make a phone call. He does. He is released soon afterwards and flies to Jordan.
I had spoken to a reporter, a German reporter who refuses to go on camera, but who is very close to federal intelligence sources here in Germany, who assured me that Kresat was an agent of the Jordanian service and an asset of the Central Intelligence Agency.
If you take Chrisat, for example, who was a bomb maker, who served Jibril and other terrorist networks for years, he was also reporting for years his activities to Israel, Jordan, some other countries' intelligence department.
The Germans did not believe that they had sufficient evidence directly linking him at the time, so that was an internal judicial decision within the German government. He obviously continued to be a suspect for us and for the British authorities, as well as for the German authorities, the BKA. I personally spoke to the president of the BKA, Dr. Boga, and he assured me that they were going to continue an all-out effort to identify everyone involved with this Jibril group inside of Germany.
There are times that to keep an agent who've been groomed for so many years and so much effort has been put, and even if he brings you the type of information that clearly indicates that there's a bomb going to go on board or there's a bomb going to go off in a public place, you must sometime let it go.